going viral in ag is really someone who's influential, speaking very highly about you outside of being a paid representative of you. That is where we've found the most success.
Coming up, we're talking to Dane Hague, who is the co-founder and CEO of MyLand, getting an update on the business over the past few years. All right, Tim, excited. This is a bit of a sponsor crossover here. We are transitioning to our new sponsor, new quarterly sponsor, PF Partners. Super excited to have them on board. We just finished up our sponsorship with MyLand, and we're talking to MyLand today. So big shout out to both of them. We're super appreciative and thankful for MyLand and excited to talk to Dane today, and really appreciate and excited to have PF Partners with us for this quarter. Before we get into this conversation, I was just thinking a lot about these challenges that we have and our competitiveness. I'd like to remind you here. So we have the book challenge going on.
Yep.
We kind of have been trying to do some sort of annual fitness competition.
Yep.
Which you've been on
failed miserably.
The wrong end of. And teaser, we're going to do another fitness competition this year. So everyone, and we'd like to bring, include more people in it, include the Modern Acre community. So we've got the fitness competition. Number 3, we have a future baking competition. Because for those that don't know, we are growing some specialty grain on Nuss Farms, Sonora wheat, that is great for baking. And Tim and I are going to use some Nuss Farms, Sonora wheat flour to have a bake-off later this year, holiday special. It's going to be great.
Love a good bake-off.
But Tim, there's a 4th competition. And the 4th competition is our competition on LinkedIn. We... You didn't know about this one, did you?
Didn't know about this one.
So Tim and I have been trying to lean into LinkedIn this year. And, it's one of these competitions, Tim. I would say this is a different type of competition because where the other competitions, I need to win and I want you to lose. In this scenario, your success is my success, right? Because you getting more followers on LinkedIn means, we're partners in everything we do. So any benefit of your reach and your following on LinkedIn is going to benefit me. So it's this really funny situation where yesterday I post a LinkedIn post, it does okay numbers. And then today you do a LinkedIn post on our farmer mode hats and it goes bonkers. And I'm not mad. I'm happy. I'm refreshing, getting that dopamine hit from your post.
You're welcome. You're tagged in the post. So yeah, it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats situation with LinkedIn for us.
Totally. Yeah. It's awesome. I literally get a like or a comment on your post. I get equal satisfaction out of a like or comment on my post. It is awesome.
Yeah. Unlike the other competitions, which is a zero-sum game.
Zero-sum game. Absolutely. Yeah. So, if you guys don't already, follow and connect with Tim and I on LinkedIn. We're putting out weekly content on LinkedIn. And Tim just posted, this is a great segue, some AI images featuring our farmer mode hat. And Tim, what is next week is episode what?
Ooh, a big 400, big milestone for us.
Next week is episode 400. We may have some announcement as it relates to the farmer mode hats. So stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Make sure you're following us on LinkedIn so you don't miss out. We have a limited supply of farmer mode hats, and we'll have all the details next week.
Todd, before we jump into this episode, anecdote on the AI images. This week, you had added me to a call. You wanted me to be on this call. I kind of politely declined the call. And while you're on the call, I'm texting you AI images. And you're like, you declined the call to be doing this. And just vibe marketing, Todd. I'm in charge of that now. So can't be on every call.
Yeah. I was grinding on a call and Tim didn't join, even though I asked him to, and is sending me goofy AI images during the call. So yeah, wasn't a good look, Tim. But honestly, because your LinkedIn post did so well, I'll forgive you.
Totally redeem myself.
All right, guys, we're going to catch up with Dane. Dane has been on the podcast. He's the co-founder and CEO of MyLand. He's been on the podcast before a few years ago, and we check in with him. And I think it's really useful, Tim, to have some of these check-in conversations to hear how founder CEOs are dealing with the macro environment, how they're getting traction with growers, how they're growing the business. We get into all of that on this episode. You guys are going to enjoy it. Hey guys, quick message from our sponsor, PF Partners. Growing your business in the agriculture space in 2025 is maybe harder than it's ever been. Investor funding has dried up, growers have tighter budgets than ever, and overall, it's just hard to go to market. PF Partners, a consulting firm with over a decade of experience scaling successful AgTech solutions globally, has just launched a new webinar on optimizing go-to-market strategies in the agribusiness space. It shows you what's changing in the market, exactly how to deal with it. Everything is backed by research, and it's about go-to-market plays in the ag sector that you can use tomorrow. So if you're ready to turn your go-to-market efforts into results, go to themodernacre.com/PFP or text modern to 55444 to download the webinar for free. That's themodernacre.com/PFP or text modern to 55444.
Execution. We fortunate enough to close a significant raise earlier this year, and it puts us in a position where we can grow by maybe 2.5x, coming off a year where we were 2x growth, and it really puts us in that enviable or great position of getting to that break even, and now you kind of crawl out of mom and dad's basement, so to speak, and move forward, which has been obviously every early stage company is looking to accomplish that. For us, it's been an incredible challenge just because of various headwinds and I think the complexity of our business, frankly, and you guys having a family farm and knowing what we're trying to do, I think you probably appreciate having a system on site that you operate and maintain yourselves and try to take as much weight off the grower's responsibility as possible is not an easy business to build. Hub and spoke relationships are tough. But it's been a long road, but a rewarding road, and we've found some really good capital partners. But it's put us in that spot where now it's all about head down execution. And then once we get through this year, then I think we can really start to tap into some very cool opportunities.
That's awesome. We're excited to get caught up to speed. We've had you on a couple of years ago when you were getting started, getting established, and there's been a lot of fundraise and growth of the team along the way. So maybe let's start, like you mentioned, the capital, but let's really talk about just kind of like how the company has evolved and kind of what markets you're currently in outside of California.
Yeah, we spoke a couple of years ago. I think at that time we maybe had a couple of systems outside of Arizona. So we were mainly in 1 or 2 systems in Arizona, a few in California. Maybe it dropped in the Pac Northwest 1 or 2. We now have 200 going on 225 systems. A lot of activity in Texas. We signed a fairly significant relationship or contract with Texas A&M AgriLife Research, and that really puts us in a position where they're effectively paying us to put our service on 12,000 acres in the state of Texas. Then alongside that, we do some intense research with them. We're going to roll forward, we believe, even in the next cycle on that with them and maybe even expand. But there's been some significant results in that area. Our base in Arizona is growing. California that's it. We can grow the entire business in California if we wanted to. It's just so big, you guys know. And then significant presence in Washington. A little bit of a footprint in Canada. The international opportunities for what we do are significant. But being able to stretch out before you've got a solid foundation to kind of jump from is a little iffy. So we've kind of dipped our toes into Canada in a lighter way with a strong relationship with United Farmers of Alberta. So we're really excited about where we're positioned, but now it's about taking those operational bases and just building within them. And you and I, before we jumped on this, we're talking a little bit about getting up in your area and what it takes to get there. And that's that one or two first movers. And then how do you build that density in that market? And that's really our challenge this year moving forward.
I mean, it's something that a ton of companies have to figure out in and outside of agriculture. I think about Uber, right? Uber is a marketplace that creates a challenge too, but you do, regardless, you need to have this kind of density, right? Where you have focus, and in your instance, support resources, boots on the ground. It's not a simple thing to expand. So maybe talk us through that a little bit, how you've thought about execution as it relates to expansion, kind of like how you tackle a new market.
And it's tough, right? Because ag is not easy at baseline. And then you throw in all the different factors that impact ag. But it could be, whiplash weather events. It can be macro. I mean, we're in a crazy macro climate now where everything is changing almost on a daily basis. So how do you respond to that? Coming out of COVID, you're dealing with supply chain, and that impacts us greatly because we have a significant investment in our systems. A lot of parts coming in from outside of the United States, and now you throw in tariffs that are going to impact it. Maybe next week we'll see how a lot of that starts to shake out. But fundamentally, what we do is let's focus on key influential growers to start with. How do we partner with them? How do we turn them into champions for us, and then work alongside them to help build out their catchment area? Going viral in ag is really someone who's influential, speaking very highly about you. Outside of being a paid representative of you, that is where we've found the most success. But we've also found other entry points into the farm because there's so many stakeholders now outside of the farm that have an interest in soil becoming better and improving. And it could be looking at carbon, you could be looking at water, you could be looking at air quality. But now you're getting into states that have investments, and talking about like Texas and Washington. We just signed a couple of contracts there with Department of Commerce and Department of Ag because they're really focused on decarbonization. So there's a stakeholder outside of the farm that would like to see the farm have tools to improve carbon sequestration, capture, cycling, whatever that focus may be. And we can find that through that relationship and actually de-risk the grower on the front end. So what we do in those instances is we'll partner with, say, the Department of Commerce in Washington, go to the grower and say, you're going to we'll place our service for free for a year. So we completely de-risk you. So they're not taking the risk. Because what I learned really early on, and you guys know this better than most, is people talk big about driving change into the farm, but then they like to drop all the risk at the farm gate and just say, there you go, deal with it. And it's going to work and everybody's going to win, but you get to deal with that. So I want to try to figure out ways to pull that risk away from the grower, and eventually would love to get to a place where we can reduce the cost of our service because the value of what they're providing through healthier soil is so great to those outside of the farm. That's easier said than done. But that's where I want to take MyLand long term.
That's super cool. I mean, I love the approach with like getting kind of the marquee, like influential farmer in an area that's a spokesperson for their local crop or their local commodity, and like using them as an entry point to get the conversation started with other growers that respect their advice. Dane, you mentioned the capital raise. Obviously, it's been a challenging market trying to raise money. There's been a few notable like ag tech companies going out of business recently with FarmWise, with Plenty, like touching a lot of different areas of agriculture. Like what's been the conversation with investors on kind of state of ag tech? You've been very successful, like doubling the company last year is awesome. But like, what are those conversations like with investors in the current climate?
It's been incredibly tough to take a step back. And we had spoken, I think, after maybe our first real tranche of outside capital from institutions came in, but we got into that phase of investment right around when SPAC was kind of on the back end of its peak. And so there was still this fervor around what was going on, and that obviously reverberates throughout the private markets. And there was a lot of momentum. And then about the time we got our lead investor there, it started to fall apart. And then everybody takes a step back. And we had to deal with that, and it caused us in that previous round, it ended up being about 18 to 24 months to close that round of financing. Then you fast forward on the backside of that, and then everything falls apart in the ag tech market from an investment perspective. And a lot of people, even funds, recognizable funds, closing shop. and you mentioned a couple of notable companies that have gone bankrupt or gone away. There's a lot. I mean, it's in certain areas of ag tech, it's been an absolute bloodbath. I mean, the CEAs have gone through the ringer in the last 18 months, and plenty being kind of the first and foremost and the golden child. And that just happening, I think, this week or maybe late last week. I mean, the amount of money that was put into CEAs that is now gone is just incredible. Our journey has been a long one. It's been a tough one. We've had a hard time breaking into certain circles, frankly, within the ag tech investment community because we are not down the fairway with what we do. We're very against the grain, and so we've had to cast the net very wide. We've probably, the saying is what you kiss 50 frogs to find the one. We've probably kissed 1,000. I mean, we've spoken to every ag tech investor and kind of impact and climate investor on the globe, it feels like. And finally, we've found really good partners that it takes them being, they have to be innovative themselves and they have to see what we're doing and they have to appreciate the complexity of it. But more than anything, they're looking at the overall market, the solutions that are available to growers. They understand that soil health is just becoming a greater component of conversation each and every day. And a good example of that is, we have a change in administration, we have all this chaos, but in kind of the background, you have this interesting dynamic where Maha could drive significant change on the farm. Now, I don't know how that interacts with Doge and all that. That's well outside of my scope, but that's another area where soil health is going to become just more and more top of mind for folks. It's been hard to find those individuals more than the institutions because it's just people you're working with. But we have, and we've been successful. But it's been an absolute grind. And I think what it forced us to do, and when we're on the back end of this, and again, we've crawled out of mom and dad's basement, and we're really running and gunning. I think we're going to appreciate the fact that we were forced to move slower. Now, that might just be some rose-colored glasses because I've lived it and I want to look back with nostalgia a little bit, but there's so much that we do that is changing even real time. Like the makeup of our systems we're still iterating forward. We're still innovating forward. If we would have taken our second generation system that the co-founders built, and we had, and I don't remember if I told this story when we first chatted, but we went out and just based on the farm manager working with the pilot system that Andy built in his front yard, we got 4 or 5 LOIs for paying customers, like right out of the gate. And that system had been decommissioned. So that's when I first learned the value of that going viral in ag with that influential grower, because we had nothing and they were willing to pay for it. Well, we couldn't get financing, so we ended up having to self-fund so we could build one. That's all we could afford. Well, having gone through that experience, if we had built 2 or 3 or 4, the company wouldn't have lasted 2 years because we wouldn't have been able to maintain and manage it because we didn't know what we were doing. We've gone through a lot of that, even in the last 3 or 4 years. So I think the forced slowdown, the forced focus on the fundamentals will end up being a good thing. And we're now in a position where we're really building out, I would say, the process and the human infrastructure foundation necessary for this to scale as aggressive as we've always wanted to. And it's probably going to be a good thing that we were forced to wait until about this time to start building that, if that makes sense.
I love that inside baseball. I think is awesome. I mean, so relatable. Like we didn't know what we were doing. Like that's so many companies that are just trying to iterate and trying to talk to customers, trying to learn, trying to deal with technology. Like it's so relatable. Dane, I want to dig in on some of these investor conversations. I find this fascinating. You talk to 1,000, you get your handful that kind of believe in you. I'm sure that some of the ones that ultimately ended up investing, you had to assuage them of some of the concerns. Could you talk us through, from an investor perspective, what were some of the biggest pushback you would get from investors, and how did you convince them that you had solved that problem or it was low risk?
Financing the equipment was probably the biggest issue we had to solve. And so for years, we're financing equipment with equity capital, which is incredibly inefficient and expensive. But finding debt financing for what we do at our stage is incredibly difficult. We were successful in finding some partners on the leasing side in the early days, which helped investors see that there is a market there, but they weren't large facilities. So it'd be $500,000 here, $1 million there, valuable, incredibly valuable partnerships, but not enough to show that we can pay for $10 to $20 million of
Not
capex.
scalable. Yeah.
Exactly, in the next 18 to 24 months or whatever. Finding a partner like Pace Zero Sustainable Partners, that has been huge for us because they give us that runway. So we didn't just close 20, 22, 23 million in equity capital. We closed a $20 million venture debt facility that pays for all of that equipment. That was the biggest hurdle with investors. Then it gets down to the base. No, I shouldn't say basic. Some of the basic analysis on their end, which is really look at what are your unit economics? Can you prove that out? That's always difficult, especially when you've got a new service going into farmers or to farmland, and we end up scaling back the cost of our system on the front end, typically to just get the ball rolling. Now that's changed quite a bit in the last couple of years because the momentum in these markets has built, but it's building out that hub and spoke relationship with the market. Can you do that? Not too many people take on that task, that complexity. And frankly, the folks that have leaned in are what I found, and what I love about the current makeup of my board is they're operators, they're entrepreneurs, they've done it. And so they've lived the life as opposed to, and there's nothing wrong with it because they absolutely provide value, but it's a difficult sell for us, or it has been. If you're purely finance and you're just looking at the numbers and the complexity, that equation is going to send you down a certain path that typically puts you in the, well, let's pass arena or hold off until you prove out that you can run a profitable business. And so you have to find those entrepreneurs and operators that were very successful, built their own fund, and now they're out doing it themselves. But that's been, I'd say the main one is that capital to finance the equipment, and then really getting into how do you scale this business? And then the first question you guys asked is, how do you scale this business in these key regions? You know, who do you lean to? Have you been successful in finding influential growers? Have you been successful in those introductions leading to anything? And we have been, and it's taken a long time to get there. But which is why the capital in the last round came in 7 months as opposed to 28 months. Yeah, so it moves a little faster.
Totally. I think that's super insightful. And I think I'd love to just break it down for listeners because we haven't talked about your product, your solution, about why this is important, right? And so maybe you can kind of break it down. Your solution, it's capital intensive, it's on the farm location, but how you monetize is on a per acre basis and soil as a service. So can you kind of break that down for listeners that are, why does this financing so important and why does this matter? Because I'm curious, it might be an interesting solution for other, CapEx intensive businesses like this.
Yeah. So starting with the business model, and this was born in the very early days, and I think we ended up staying on this course because you had 3 individuals who started this business that didn't come from industry, being ag or soil microbiome. And so when we were being pushed into kind of centralized production of an input, so if you put us into a category, it'd be a biologic. We provide a service, and there's a uniqueness to our service that keeps us out of that product category. But if you were to categorize us, it would be biologic. 99.9% of all biologics are done in a centralized facility. You have a strain or a consortium of strains, you bottle it, you send it out, and you hope to have efficacy across different ecosystems, environments, crops, all that good stuff. What we did in the very early days is we said we want to deliver live native microalgae. So that forced us into having an on-site system. That on-site system allows us to grow, manufacture, and deliver live native microalgae whenever the farmer is irrigating their farmland. We looked at models and pulling that system off because it is an expensive investment to build this system, to own that system, and to operate it. But we could never pencil out the distribution component with regional facilities as well as kind of trucking or whatever it may be. And the last thing we want to do, and we want to figure out how to even improve this moving forward, we do not want to put the onus on the grower. We actually want to pull more off of their plate, because all you have to do is spend a heartbeat with the grower and you realize they have enough going on. And the moment you say, can you do this? Just wait to see the response in their face, and you'll go, okay, I should go the opposite way, which is, how do I pull more off of your plate, make your life a little easier? And so that necessitated that on-site system. So our service that we provide is that we go out on site, we grab soil samples, we bring them back to our lab in Phoenix, we go through an isolation process. We're looking for all of the native microalgae that's on site, that's present. We typically find between 5 and 20 species. Then we'll go through a selection process, and we have specific characteristics that we're looking for. And once we select a species that we think is best suited for the soil type, the crop, the region, whatever it may be, we will place a system on site. That's going to be next to typically an injection point, so it's near irrigation power, taps into that critical infrastructure. So we tap into the water source, we tap into the irrigation line, we tap into the power, and then we inoculate that system. We can remotely monitor and operate these systems from home base in Phoenix, but we do have regional service and maintenance that is provided, because this is a live biologic that is growing real time on site. So it is a daily dynamic that we're having to deal with. And so you have that hub and spoke relationship. We own, we maintain. We don't want to. We were asked in the early days, why don't you just sell the system to a grower? And then you would take people out and you would open the system and show them, and they would quickly understand why you wouldn't want to do that. So we talked earlier about, don't put more on their plate. Giving them, a how-to on how to grow algae real time, live biologic, and operate the software is the absolute wrong direction to go. And the stickiness of the relationship by owning the equipment, maintaining it, and then providing it as a service on a per acre basis is incredible. And it allows us to leverage that platform, that base station moving forward, because what we know, and the reason we leaned into microalgae in the early days, is that it is the base of the food chain in the soil microbiome. So if you think about the biologic market, you've got all this bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi, and some of it's good. We feed those products. So if they're having an impact in an area, there's an ability for our base station to not only deliver our microalgae, but potentially other things that our microalgae can feed and deliver greater impact to that environment. The revenue model that we adopted early days, and you spoke to this a little bit, Tyler, was we charge on a per acre per year basis, and it's a subscription agreement. So it's not month to month, it's a multi-year contract, but there's an out. We don't want to try to lock people in and say, this is what it is for the next 5 years or whatever it may be. The idea is, if you're dissatisfied with the service, we're going to do everything in our power to fix it. But if we can't, then we'll pick up the system, we'll take it somewhere else, we'll drop it, and we'll start delivering live native microalgae to that grower. That business model combined with that revenue model created a dynamic within the company where you've got an algae lab, you've got ag science, agronomy built in, you've got service centers that are in our areas of operation. So in Texas, California, Washington, Arizona. So you have a large amount of human infrastructure that has to be built, as well as the CapEx demand. So when it comes to raising capital, we've, since we really started leaning in kind of late 19, we raised a little over $80 million when you include the venture debt. And it's because of the complexity of the business and the demands that exist with respect to our systems.
Dane, had a couple questions around kind of like the price per acre model. Like you mentioned, like when you identify the algae, you identify the one that's the best fit for the crop that's going to be. Like in a permanent system, that makes sense. Like if you're in a situation where it's annual and you're going from tomatoes to corn to other crops, are you changing the product on an annual basis in that scenario? In terms of pricing, like there's a broad spectrum of value of these crops, like almonds, tomatoes, corn. There's kind of like different price points. So are you kind of adjusting the price per acre based on the crop type?
So we're not at a place yet where we're adjusting the algae strain based on the crop type. We really focus on, and to be honest, Tim, at this point, it's finding an algae strain on site that grows fast and is dense. And there are some other characteristics that we look for, but it's fairly narrow at this point. We just want to get as much biomass out into that environment as possible, because it's not just what's grown in the system that matters. It's the fact that that microalgae continues to survive in the soil, and it will continue to propagate in the soil so long as it's alive. And then when it dies, it becomes that food source. We will, over the next, call it 1 to 2, maybe 3 years, start to really look at DNA sequencing on the algae that we're selecting for the site. And then we'll start down the path of looking at efficacy as it relates to soil type and as it relates to crop type. I don't know if we'll get to a place where we go from one strain to another, or if it's more likely that we have multiple strains that roll through a system for redundancy and maybe trying to hit multiple things. But we're a bit a ways from that. Really, at this point, it's as much biomass as possible. The pricing is difficult. It is because our value proposition to different growers can be dramatically different. We've had instances in Texas with onion growers where the return is well north of 10x after one season. And then you know, next door, we'll have your cotton grower who the return is not as great just because their margins are less. We focus on higher value specialty crops, but understand that those growers also have a variety of crops that they attack. We try to be as flexible as we can, and we're always looking at different ways to attack the pricing model and how to work with the grower to make it work within their dynamics. So even we're evaluating, we're not here yet, but looking at, you know, do you charge if you've got a bearing and an alt bearing year or years in your, you know, almond production, pistachio production, whatever it is, do you price differently because you know the grower in that alt bearing year is going to have more challenges from a margin perspective, from an operational perspective. And then can we implement that model? We haven't gone down that path yet, but we're constantly looking at it because we're seeing that if it's supposed to be a good year, our pricing is not a problem at all. If it's supposed to be a down year or an off year, pricing becomes a point of conversation, even if the ROI is penciling out, just because that number can give folks sticker shock. So we're constantly looking at it, but right now it's more standardized across the board. And then when working with the growers, we will react real time to try to meet their dynamics, but then build into that pricing as we prove out that the ROI is there, even if it's a lower value crop. It just may take a little longer for us to get there. And we're okay with that.
Yeah, and I think that's true of a lot of ag tech right now. Like when it's a frothier year, there's willingness to invest more in kind of the other stuff, the extra stuff, right? So I think that everyone is seeing that in the ad tech space right now. Dane, I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about, you know, your model. You alluded to it a little bit, kind of direct to grower. How you think about interacting with the channel, if at all, and how you think about interacting with other kind of soil health practices, right? When you have agronomists, the trusted advisor giving other recommendations, maybe it's other biologicals, bio-based products. Like, how do you think about collaborating with other products, other soil health practices, and the channel?
Yeah, I would say as far as distribution, the direct grower is difficult. It gets back into that organic, find that influential grower and then build from there, and then having the ability to lean in a region, an area, state, whatever it may be. But we love the direct grower model. We've talked to folks about potential distribution, but where the rubber meets the road is when it gets down to the customer relationship, when it gets down to operating the system and making sure that it's as high quality as possible. There is so much interaction with the mainframe at MyLand that you really can't separate those. And so when you look at your typical channels, they don't have the infrastructure in place to take that on. And then there's not a clean break with what we would do and what they would do. So if we were bottling our product, manufacturing it, that clean break is we've bottled it and now we can send it out. So you access the market, you sell, we'll provide. For us, that providing is an ongoing conversation with the grower, and it's ever evolving. because what we're learning in their environment as well as that area is always changing. So we're trying to provide new information to the grower, new opportunity to that grower. So when I think about leveraging maybe platforms to grow outside of just direct grower, look at large landholders that are maybe not the operators, but they're very close. So like an International Farming Corporation, we have a really strong relationship with them and doing business with them up in the Pac Northwest. That's an area where we can lean in and prove out and then try to use that base or try to work with them to see where we can provide value across their operational base. When you look at areas that might be, or you look at strategics that might be synergistic with what we do outside of the biologics, your irrigation equipment, we're plug and play. So we haven't really kickstarted conversations with these groups to any level of depth. We've had kind of surface level, but really looking at how can we leverage what they're doing and their growth strategies. And there are some that are adopting service models alongside like ours, that we could potentially throw gas on each other's fire as we move forward. I think we need to grow up a little bit more to get there and to have more success in those conversations. But I don't think we're far from being able to lean in. When we think about how the algae interacts with other biologics and us potentially participating alongside them, it is absolutely part of our future, because we think that it's going to deliver greater value to the grower. The difficult piece is going to be we're live native, we're foundational to that ecosystem, and we're coming from that ecosystem. So how do we select that biologic to work with? And then how do you avoid the multi-million-dollar R&D rabbit hole chasing that solution? So it's going to be working with people that are very high quality, probably have had some success in the area. So maybe, around your farm, you might know of a biologic that's hitting more than it's not. That would probably be in that area, somebody that we would talk to, or we would talk to the distributor, whoever it might be, to maybe work alongside them in that area. But I don't think it would be a holistic, this is what we're going to do everywhere. I think it's going to be much like how we attack the market today, very regional and localized approach to impact.
Dane, as we kind of wrap up here, would love to get into kind of in-field performance. You've been scaling up the past couple of years. Talk about grower ROI, like maybe just talk about like what's working, what's driving that ROI, if it's yield increase or healthier plants or water retention. What are kind of the key things that the product is impacting on farm?
So it's been a bit of a mixed bag on what's driving it, and we have had some instances where we're learning. And it really, what's interesting, and I'll hit the latter first, is we've had some installations with potato growers that were trying to starve nitrogen in the back end of their cycle, and it just happened that we were running a parallel study with Arizona State University on what is our microalgae feeding in the microbiome and hitting the big ones, so your beneficial bacteria, your mycorrhizal fungi. And they found out at about the same time that we ran into this wall out in the field that we were feeding nitrogen fixing bacteria at an incredible rate in the soil. It was almost equivalent to like a legume. And so at the same time we were learning that, we had a grower that's trying to starve their field of nitrogen. So we had some agronomic practices that we needed to learn to build into. So kind of neutral in that regard. At the same time, we were operating potatoes in California and doing amazing. So it's kind of a regional, we were running into walls in the Pac Northwest, and at the same time we were having amazing results in California. So we're still learning how our service interacts with those agronomic practices in some areas. But I would say in other areas, it's yield, and yield quality is where that grower leans into first. That's where they want to see it. They're not going to dial back the nitrogen, the soil amendments in year one, although we have seen growers do that. So we've seen in California on pistachios as much as 35% reduction in nitrogen in the first year. But more importantly to them, we've seen 8 to 12% pop in yield in the first year. And now we're getting into years 2 and 3. Apple is the same thing up in Washington. And what I would say, Tim, on that question is kind of, if you look at, it wouldn't be a category, but a type that we've been surprised at the success we've had has been trees. because we've been told all along, and we continue to believe it until it's proven out further, is that it's just going to take time to build in impact on a tree because that environment is just so much more involved. But what we've seen in year one is we saw a 5x return to an apple grower in Washington. That was an on year, and then in the next off year, they still had that 5x return. So you're looking at about a 9 to 10% increase in the first year and a 28% increase in the second year. We're now starting year three. If we can go from 9 to 10 and now to 15 to 20, now that's just gonna build. But that's just yield and yield quality. We have seen reductions in water in areas where growers really hyper focus on that. So you'd be looking at your California, a bit of Texas, and then getting into Arizona, as much as 20 to 30% if they're really tracking it. And we've got some cool relationships being developed potentially in Arizona, and then extensions in Texas that will be a hyper focus on water savings on farm, but it's going to have to go beyond what we do. It's going to have to bring other technologies and other information to the table so we can give the grower that confidence that they can really dial back utilization of that. But we've had results as crazy as an onion grower in Texas that it's a 50x return in the first year. That is not what we're going to do across the board, but it's exciting to see something like that pop. Second year, we're working on cabbage now. It sounds like it's relatively good results. We'll see how the pack out data shakes out. And then I would say on pesticides and herbicides, we don't make any claims there. That's just not a path we want to go down, but we have seen growers who have interacted with their professionals and they have dialed back. And I think it gets back to they've got a healthier plant. And as a result, their CCA is giving them advice that maybe they don't have to apply as much during the cycle. So it's a mixed bag, and that creates challenges in selling because I'd love to be able to go to you and say, we're going to apply our service. It's going to impact this and this and this and this, and there's your ROI, like the chemical reactions in the soil. But the reality is until we get out there, until we interact with your agronomic practices, we're not going to know the overall impact. Nor we will understand going in, but your pressures might be different than even your neighbors from a water perspective or a salinity perspective, and we're going to have impact on those as well. So it's all over the board.
Well, Dane, this has been a ton of fun to catch up. We love what you guys are doing. Appreciate you also being a sponsor of the show. As we wrap up, how can listeners get in touch and connect with you and MyLand?
Go to myland.ag.
So, Ty, what do you think?
I love how they have been thinking about capital efficiency and raising money and doing some of this debt financing. I think is really savvy for such a CapEx heavy business. And I hope, listeners can learn from that, right? Other CapEx heavy AgTech companies, there's these different financing mechanisms that can help you be more financially efficient and leverage money in a good way. So I thought that was really interesting and just love how they're thinking about growth and expansion and what they're doing in the soil health space.
Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We will be back next week. Huge episode 400. We'll talk to you soon.